Alert, alert, this is a Doomcock News alert. Alert, alert, this is a Doomcock News alert.
In the last episode of the Cringe Fest I recently named Game of Groans, the world collectively groaned as alert fans spotted a coffee cup sitting beside Daenerys. This was the coffee cup seen round the world, the first hint any of us had ever had in all these seasons that Winterfell has its own Starbucks. Presumably, every major castle has its own Starbucks, with King's Landing being the biggest Starbucks, with the latest hits playing over curated Pandora stations, My Ass Itches by the Flea Bottom 5 being the most popular track by far, good Wi-Fi just a block away from the fast rail train station that makes traveling across Westeros such a breeze for armies, Gendry, Bronn, and the dragons, who have a special compartment all their own. It also has gender-neutral restrooms, meaning of course there are no men's restrooms in Westeros anymore, as men can no longer have anything of their own, including the ability to not have Arya steal their plot lines and save their asses when they're running from fire. Yes, this coffee cup spoke volumes and explained a lot about the plot holes on this show. But sometimes, a coffee cup is not merely a coffee cup, but a symbolic expression of something quite different. In this case, that coffee cup is a sign of disrespect. In the past, before this show became Game of Groans, this series was known for its extremely high production values and commitment to authenticity and to details. Everything down to the fabric for tapestries in the background that no one would ever notice was meticulously chosen by art directors and set designers for harmonious integration not only into that episode's color scheme, but also the world's aesthetic. That was back when the producers gave a damn, when a mistake of this magnitude would get you reprimanded if not fired. That coffee cup, sitting there in plain view, is evidence of a pervasive sloppiness in the production. A visceral sign for all the world to see that Dumb and Dumber are all out of fucks to give about Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin, in a recent interview, affirmed that there was enough material in the books he had already written to guarantee at least 10 full seasons of Game of Thrones, and he figures that Benioff and Weiss have simply decided that they'd rather have lives than work on the show. Essentially, George R.R. Martin was saying, indirectly, that Dumb and Dumber were bored with this show and wanted to move on. This seems to be the most likely explanation for why so many things have gotten rushed these past several seasons, since HBO clearly wanted as much Game of Thrones as they could possibly get, at one point even developing 5 different spin-off series to feed the hungry fans. Sadly for HBO, Benioff and Weiss have poisoned a great number of these fans, leaving behind a trail of dead viewers who no longer give a damn about this show. Why? I would argue that on the most basic level, despite the idiotic plot holes, the violations of character integrity and show lore, the unbelievably sloppy execution of the all but unwatchable Battle of Winterfell, the premature and anticlimactic deaths of the Night King and Rhaegal, at its root, Game of Thrones is so infuriating because it is now being made without respect. That coffee cup on the table outraged fans all over the world, not merely because it's an anachronism, an out-of-place artifact of our world inserted into theirs, but because even though the average viewer might not have been able to immediately articulate it, fans around the world were outraged because this coffee cup was an expression of contempt for them, for George R.R. Martin, and for their own show. Season 8 of Game of Groans is one extended expression of utter disrespect for everything that came before and everyone who has loved this show since the beginning. Did you know that the filmmakers made the pilot twice? They essentially had to reshoot the pilot to get it right. They cared about the show in the beginning, when it was their big break, and they approached the show with an attitude that they were going to do it right if it killed them. It was a massive and expensive undertaking, but they did it out of love for the material, respect for the audience, and self-respect in not wanting their names on something that was substandard. Contrast that with the dreary, lackluster mess that is Season 8. You can't tell me that when the producers saw that rough cut of Episode 3, The Battle of Winterfell, that they couldn't see what a worthless mess it was, a jumbled game of Marco Polo in the dark, filmed by cameramen having epileptic seizures on exercise bikes. They should have known during the production, seeing the dailies, that their approach to filming this battle was faulty, and they must have known they were releasing a substandard product upon seeing the final item. They have eyes in their heads. They know what good Game of Thrones is because they made it for at least 4 years before they ran out of material to adapt. They knew this was shoddy, and they just didn't care. They remade the pilot because there was money to be made, and they were fans of the books back then, granted, and they wanted to do something special. But over the course of the last few years, they got bored, they got a Star Wars trilogy, they got money, and the only thing they didn't have in abundance was fucks to give about Game of Thrones. And so we now see the result. The Night King is dispatched in his first battle by Arya, turning the dread phrase, "winter is coming," into a punchline. They ditch Ghost because they can't be bothered to deal with all the wolf optical effects. They kill Rhaegal out of the blue for cheap shock value, never minding what this does to our dreams of seeing King's Landing under siege by dragons at the height of their power. Storyline after storyline has been rendered meaningless and anticlimactic as narrative threads have petered out and died. The Dothraki were worthless. Bran does nothing. Jon's quest to kill the Night King was for naught since his sister got the job done as he tried to commit suicide by yelling at an undead dragon. Arya doesn't even use her faceless man trick to kill the Night King. She just runs at him and yells, so all that shit in Braavos was worthless. All of this is a direct result of a lack of respect for fans. Dumb and Dumber were more concerned with shortening the seasons and moving on to their next, more lucrative gigs than with providing a satisfactory ending that would reward fans for their loyalty these many years. Instead of going back to the drawing board when they saw what they had done, as they did with the pilot, they instead released it on HBO and, in a shocking display of disrespect, released an article blaming viewers for not having their televisions properly adjusted to watch the show. Naturally, the abuser always blames the victim, right? And when the coffee cup became news, how did the production react? Instead of being mortified and apologizing for this failure of caring, they joked about it, made some crack about how Dany actually ordered tea. Instead of feeling shame that in the final stretch of the marathon they publicly shat themselves, they laughed it off. Could the level of disrespect for fans be more glaring? One might be tempted, after all these years of happiness this show has brought us, to believe that this is all some kind of mistake, that we're missing something, that it's us that has stumbled somehow. They're trying to tell us that these characters were like this all along, that Jon was always a mopey and ineffectual dupe for stronger women who bent the knee and shied away from battle, that Sansa was always the smartest member of the family, that Arya was always a Deus Ex Machina script device with plot armor, that Ghost never really mattered, and Jon would give him away without so much as a pat on the head goodbye. That Dany is a crazy bitch who, despite all her years of striving to bring justice to the people, will turn tyrannical when she thinks that those people like Jon better than her. They want us to think that the characters and the quality of the show have stayed the same all along. But their attempt to gaslight us, to blame us for not seeing the genius of their design, has failed because of a coffee cup. People, that set was swarming with activity. All the actors, the crew, the director, the continuity staff, the cinematographer, the cameraman, the producers, yet none of them noticed the coffee cup. And in post, the effects people, the editors, the color correctionists, the executives at HBO itself, none of them noticed. On every level of production, that coffee cup is a clear sign that this season is being phoned in by people who have already mentally checked out. I imagine there were people on the crew during the shoot, during takes, that were working contacts for their next jobs, polishing up their resumes, browsing the trades. Even worse, I think it's entirely possible they noticed the coffee cup and couldn't be bothered to do a fix-in-post that I could have done on my home computer in an hour or less. That's how little these people give a shit about Game of Thrones. This is how little these people think of you. I started a hashtag about a year ago. Without respect, we reject. It has never been more relevant. If we want things to change in Hollywood, if we want to stop these idiots from ruining our modern myths with woke politics, with perversions of canon, with stunt casting, moronic scripts, and coffee cups in Westeros, we've got to make a stand. Will you stand with me? Will you rally to the call? Before we can make these people respect us, we must first respect ourselves. And that means we must boycott any project, any company, any individual who treats us with disrespect. Lucasfilm has repeatedly and vociferously called fans racists, sexists, and even evil for hating The Last Jedi. CBS tried to funnel its toxic waste down our throats, calling it Star Trek Discovery. Doctor Who went woke, and now Game of Thrones has displayed a spectacular lack of respect for fans by rushing out a substandard season that has utterly destroyed this series. They have not rewarded us for all our years of devotion. Instead, they have spit in our faces. We are Ghost. And we have been abandoned without even so much as a pat on the head. I say, when that happens, we no longer reward it. I say, from now on, boycott Benioff and Weiss. I say, when you hear their names, see their credits on a movie, remember the coffee cup and stay away. Without respect, we reject. From now on, let us all agree, before you ask us for our business, you damn well better pay us some respect. From the center of the earth, this is Dictor Van Doomcock bidding you all, my friends, stay angry.
Ha 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 ha.